Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepy Quiet History channel. Tonight, we begin a long and peaceful journey into one of the most fascinating civilizations in human history. Ancient Egypt. A land of pyramids rising from golden deserts. A land where mighty pharaohs ruled beside the Nile River for thousands of years. A place filled with gods, mysteries, sacred temples, hidden tombs, and stories written in stone. For more than 3,000 years, Egyptian civilization flourished along the banks of the Nile. Entire generations were born, lived, and died beneath the same desert sun, while the river continued its endless flow through the heart of the kingdom. And even today, thousands of years later, the monuments they built still stand. The pyramids remain nearly untouched by time. Ancient temples still rise above the sand. The faces of long-dead kings still stare outward from stone statues. Even the mummies of pharaohs survive, preserved with astonishing care.
Tonight, we are not rushing through history. Instead, we will slowly drift through the world of ancient Egypt together. We will explore the Nile River, the pyramids, sacred animals, the pharaohs, hieroglyphics, temples, mummies, astronomy, medicine, and the quiet daily lives of ordinary people who lived beneath the shadow of the monuments. So settle in, relax your breathing. Let the modern world slowly fade away as we travel backward through thousands of years into the land the Greeks once called the gift of the Nile. The ancient Greek historian Herodotus famously described Egypt as the gift of the Nile, and in many ways, he was absolutely correct. Without the Nile River, ancient Egypt could never have existed. The Nile stretches more than 4,000 miles across northeastern Africa, making it one of the longest rivers on Earth. It begins far to the south in Central Africa and flows northward through deserts before finally reaching the Mediterranean Sea. But the true miracle of the Nile was not merely its size. It was its reliability. Every single year, almost like clockwork, the river flooded. Far away in the Ethiopian highlands, seasonal rains swelled the river's tributaries. By late summer, floodwaters arrived in Egypt, spilling across the valley floor. To many civilizations, floods brought destruction and chaos. But to the Egyptians, the flooding Nile brought life. When the waters receded, they left behind dark, fertile soil, rich with nutrients. This black earth transformed the desert valley into one of the most productive farming regions in the ancient world. The Egyptians even divided their land into two symbolic regions. The fertile valley surrounding the Nile was called the Black Land. The desert beyond it was called the Red Land. Life and death existed side by side. Only a few miles separated lush green farmland from endless, barren sand. This contrast deeply shaped Egyptian thought and religion. The fertile land represented order, life, and rebirth. The desert represented danger, chaos, and death. The Nile also created stability. Unlike many rivers that flooded unpredictably, the Nile usually followed the same seasonal pattern year after year. This reliability allowed Egyptian farmers to plan ahead with confidence. The Egyptian year itself was organized around the river. The first season was Akhet, the flood season. Then came Peret, the growing season, when crops emerged from the rich mud. Finally came Shemu, the harvest season, when food was gathered and stored. Because the Nile provided such dependable harvests, Egypt developed large food surpluses.
And these surpluses changed everything. Not everyone needed to farm anymore. Some people became priests, others became artists, scribes, builders, engineers, soldiers, or administrators. This specialization helped Egypt become one of the most advanced civilizations of the ancient world. The Nile was not only a source of food, it was also Egypt's great highway. Traveling across desert terrain was difficult, but the river connected the entire kingdom from south to north. Boats drifted northward with the current, while winds allowed sails to travel southward. Stone blocks for pyramids moved along the river. Grain shipments traveled to distant cities. Messages from pharaohs reached faraway provinces. Armies moved efficiently along the Nile corridor. The river united Egypt into a single civilization, and everywhere along its banks, life flourished. Fishermen cast nets into the water. Farmers tended fields of wheat and barley. Birds nested among thick papyrus reeds. Crocodiles rested in muddy shallows, while hippopotamuses drifted slowly through calm waters. To the Egyptians, these animals were not simply creatures. Many were sacred. The crocodile became associated with Sobek, a powerful river god. The hippopotamus was linked to Tauret, a protective goddess connected to childbirth and motherhood. Nature and religion blended together seamlessly in Egyptian life. The annual flooding of the Nile became more than a natural event. It became a symbol of cosmic balance and divine order. The Egyptians believed the universe depended on a sacred principle called Ma'at. Ma'at represented harmony, truth, balance, and order. As long as the Nile flooded properly and society remained stable, Ma'at was being maintained. The pharaoh's duty was to preserve this balance between humanity, nature, and the gods. If floods failed or chaos spread through the kingdom, people feared that cosmic order itself was weakening. And so, year after year, generation after generation, Egypt's entire civilization revolved around the river. The Nile shaped where people lived. It shaped what they ate. It shaped their religion, politics, economy, and worldview. Without the Nile, the pyramids would never have risen. The temples would never have been built. The great cities would never have existed. The river gave Egypt life. And for thousands of years, that life continued almost unchanged beneath the eternal desert sky. As ancient Egypt grew stronger along the Nile River, its rulers began searching for ways to preserve their power forever. Not just during life, but after death as well. The Egyptians believed death was not the end of existence. It was a transition into another world, a new, eternal life that required preparation, protection, and sacred rituals. And so the pharaohs began building tombs unlike anything humanity had ever seen before. Long before the Great Pyramids appeared, Egyptian rulers were buried inside structures called mastabas. These tombs were rectangular buildings made from mud brick with flat roofs and underground burial chambers beneath them. But around 2600 BCE, something extraordinary happened. A brilliant architect named Imhotep changed history forever. Serving Pharaoh Djoser, Imhotep designed a completely new kind of royal tomb at Saqqara. Instead of building a single mastaba, he stacked several mastabas on top of each other, each one slightly smaller than the one below it. The result was the step pyramid. For the first time in history, human beings created a massive monument entirely from stone on such an enormous scale.
The structure rose high above the desert, like a staircase reaching toward the heavens. To the Egyptians, this was not simply architecture. It was sacred symbolism. The pyramid allowed the soul of the pharaoh to rise upward toward the gods and the stars. And once the first pyramid succeeded, Egypt entered an age of astonishing ambition. Future pharaohs wanted larger tombs, taller monuments, more perfect structures that would preserve their names for eternity. Eventually, builders refined the design by filling in the steps to create smooth-sided pyramids. These gleaming monuments reflected sunlight brilliantly across the desert landscape.
The most famous of all were built at Giza during Egypt's 4th dynasty. The Great Pyramid of Khufu became the tallest structure on Earth for nearly 4,000 years. Even today, its scale remains difficult to fully comprehend. Originally standing nearly 500 feet tall, the pyramid contained more than 2 million stone blocks, many weighing several tons each. And somehow, ancient builders working without modern machines created it with astonishing precision. The base is almost perfectly level. The sides align closely with true north, south, east, and west. The engineering still amazes scientists and historians today. How did they achieve such accuracy? The Egyptians carefully observed the stars. They used ropes, measuring tools, geometry, and water-filled trenches to establish level surfaces. Everything required planning on an enormous scale. Stone had to be quarried far away and transported across the Nile. Workers hauled blocks using sledges over wet sand. Rams were built to raise the stones layer by layer higher into the sky. And despite old myths, the pyramids were not primarily built by slaves. Archaeological discoveries reveal something far more interesting. Most pyramid builders were ordinary Egyptians, farmers who worked during the Nile flood season when their fields were underwater. They lived in organized workers' villages near construction sites. Excavations uncovered their homes, bakeries, tools, and even graffiti left behind thousands of years ago. Some worker teams gave themselves names like Friends of Khufu or the Drunkards of Menkaure. These people took pride in what they were building. To them, the pyramids were sacred projects connected directly to the afterlife of the divine king and the stability of Egypt itself. Building a pyramid required one of the largest organized labor systems the ancient world had ever seen. Thousands of workers cooperated together for years. Stonecutters, engineers, boatmen, bakers, scribes, architects, priests, laborers. Entire communities existed to support pyramid construction, and the pyramids themselves were only part of much larger complexes. Each pyramid included temples where priests performed rituals for the dead pharaoh. Causeways connected ceremonial buildings to the Nile. Smaller tombs surrounded the main pyramid for queens, nobles, and officials hoping to spend eternity near their ruler. The pyramid became the center of an entire sacred landscape. Deep inside the structure rested the burial chamber itself. Long corridors led downward through stone passageways toward rooms containing the king's sarcophagus. The Egyptians believed the pharaoh's body needed preservation in order for the soul to survive. This belief inspired the development of mummification. Inside the tomb, workers placed treasures and supplies for eternal life. Furniture, food, jewelry, weapons, clothing, statues.
precious objects of gold and stone. Everything the pharaoh might need after death was carefully prepared. To the Egyptians, eternity was not abstract, it was practical. The dead would continue living in another realm and therefore required the comforts of earthly life. Over time, pyramid construction slowly declined. Later pyramids became smaller and less ambitious. Perhaps the cost was too great. Perhaps political priorities changed. Perhaps religious beliefs evolved. But the Great Pyramids of Giza remained. For more than 4,000 years, they have survived sandstorms, invasions, earthquakes, and the collapse of entire empires. Ancient Greek travelers stared at them in wonder. Roman visitors explored them. Medieval scholars studied them. Modern tourists still stand speechless beneath their enormous shadows. And somehow, despite all the centuries that have passed, the pyramids still create the same feeling they created long ago. A feeling of mystery, a feeling of timelessness, a feeling that human beings once attempted to build something eternal, and perhaps succeeded. To truly understand ancient Egypt, we must understand the pharaoh. The pharaoh was not viewed as an ordinary king. To the Egyptian people, the ruler was something far greater, a living connection between humanity and the gods themselves. The pharaoh stood at the center of Egyptian civilization. Politics, religion, law, agriculture, war, and cosmic order all revolved around this single figure seated upon the throne beside the Nile. The Egyptians believed their ruler carried divine responsibility. It was the pharaoh's sacred duty to preserve Ma'at, the universal balance and harmony that held the world together. As long as the pharaoh ruled wisely, the Nile would flood properly, crops would grow, temples would flourish, and Egypt would remain stable. But if order collapsed, if famine or chaos spread through the kingdom, many believed the balance between humanity and the gods had been disturbed. This made the role of pharaoh almost unimaginably important. The ruler was not simply governing people. He was maintaining the stability of the universe itself. Egyptian artwork often portrayed pharaohs larger than ordinary humans, towering above servants, soldiers, and enemies. This was not meant to be realistic. It was symbolic. The king represented divine power. Many pharaohs associated themselves directly with specific gods. During life, the pharaoh was often linked to Horus, the falcon god of kingship and the sky. After death, the ruler became associated with Osiris, god of the underworld and resurrection. This connection between kingship and divinity shaped every aspect of Egyptian culture. Massive temples were built to honor both gods and rulers. Priests performed rituals daily to maintain divine favor. Enormous statues displayed the ruler's power to the kingdom and to eternity itself. One of the most famous pharaohs in history was Ramesses II, often called Ramesses the Great. He ruled for more than 60 years during Egypt's New Kingdom period and covered the land with colossal monuments. Gigantic statues of Ramses stood outside temples across Egypt. His image appeared everywhere, carved into stone walls and towering pillars. At Abu Simbel in southern Egypt, enormous seated statues of the king were carved directly into the mountainside. Even today, visitors standing beneath them feel tiny in comparison. The statues were designed to create exactly that feeling. The pharaoh was meant to appear larger than ordinary life itself, eternal, powerful, godlike. Another famous ruler was Hatshepsut, one of the few women to successfully rule Egypt as pharaoh. Because kingship was traditionally male, official artwork often portrayed her wearing the ceremonial false beard and royal clothing normally associated with male rulers. Yet her reign was peaceful and prosperous. Trade expanded, temples were constructed. Egypt flourished economically. Her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahri remains one of the most elegant structures in Egypt today, rising in graceful terraces against towering desert cliffs. Then there was Tutankhamun, perhaps the most famous pharaoh in the modern world. Ironically, Tutankhamun himself was not especially powerful or historically important during his lifetime. He became famous because his tomb remained largely untouched for more than 3,000 years. When British archaeologist Howard Carter discovered the tomb in 1922, the world was stunned. Inside lay extraordinary treasures: golden shrines, jewelry, chariots, thrones, weapons, statues, and the famous golden funerary mask that has since become one of the most recognizable objects in human history. The discovery revealed how rich and sophisticated Egyptian royal burial practices truly were. And perhaps most importantly, it reignited global fascination with ancient Egypt itself. Yet not all pharaohs ruled peacefully. Some expanded Egypt through war and conquest. Armies marched north into the Near East and south into Nubia. Chariots thundered across battlefields while archers filled the sky with arrows. Victorious kings recorded their triumphs on temple walls in enormous carved reliefs showing enemies fleeing before the might of Egypt. These scenes projected power both to Egyptians and foreign rivals. But even mighty rulers eventually faced the same reality: death. And so, much of Egyptian civilization revolved around preparing for what came afterward. The Egyptians believed each person possessed multiple spiritual aspects. The Ka represented life force. The Ba represented personality and mobility. For the soul to survive after death, the body had to remain preserved. This belief inspired one of the most remarkable funerary traditions in human history: mummification. The process was incredibly detailed and took around 70 days to complete. Priests carefully removed internal organs, which were stored inside special canopic jars protected by divine figures. The body was dried using natron salt to remove moisture and prevent decay. Then it was wrapped carefully in linen bandages, layer after layer, while sacred prayers and rituals were performed. Amulets were placed between the wrappings for protection in the afterlife. Finally, the mummy was sealed inside decorated coffins, often covered with gold, painted symbols, and hieroglyphic texts. The Egyptians did not view this process as gruesome. To them, it was an act of care, respect, and spiritual necessity. The dead needed preservation to continue existing in eternity. Tombs became houses for the afterlife. Walls were painted with scenes of feasts, farming, music, hunting, and family life, so these pleasures could continue forever in the next world. Books of spells and prayers guided souls safely through the dangers of the underworld. One of the most important beliefs involved the weighing of the heart ceremony. According to Egyptian religion, the heart of the deceased would be weighed against the feather of Ma'at, symbol of truth and balance. If the heart was pure and balanced, the soul could enter eternal paradise. But if the heart was heavy with wrongdoing, it would be devoured by a terrifying creature called Amit. This belief encouraged moral behavior throughout Egyptian society. truthfulness, fairness, generosity, and respect for cosmic order became deeply important values. For the Egyptians, eternity was not guaranteed automatically. It had to be earned through balance and righteous living. And so, beneath the endless desert sky, generation after generation prepared not only for life beside the Nile, but for eternity beyond it.
Ancient Egypt was filled with gods. Not one god, not a small group of gods, but hundreds of divine beings connected to nature, the sky, the Nile, death, fertility, animals, the stars, and the invisible forces Egyptians believed shaped reality itself. Religion surrounded every part of Egyptian life. The rising of the sun each morning was sacred. The flooding of the Nile was sacred. Birth, death, farming, kingship, even the movement of stars across the night sky carried spiritual meaning. The Egyptians did not separate religion from daily life the way many modern societies do. For them, the world itself was alive with divine presence. Among the most important gods was Ra, the sun god. Ra traveled across the sky each day in a solar boat, bringing light to the world. At night, he journeyed through the dangerous underworld, battling forces of chaos before rising again at dawn. Every sunrise symbolized victory over darkness and disorder. This daily cycle reassured Egyptians that cosmic balance still existed. Another central figure was Osiris, ruler of the underworld and symbol of resurrection. According to Egyptian mythology, Osiris had once been a wise king who was murdered by his jealous brother Seth. But Osiris was restored through the devotion of his wife Isis and became ruler of the realm of the dead. This story deeply influenced Egyptian beliefs about death and rebirth. Just as the sun rose again each morning and crops returned after the Nile floods, human beings too could experience rebirth after death. Isis became one of the most beloved deities in Egyptian religion. She represented motherhood, protection, healing, and magic. Her devotion to Osiris and her son Horus symbolized loyalty and divine love. For thousands of years, Egyptians prayed to Isis for protection and comfort. Then there was Anubis, recognizable by his jackal head. Anubis guided souls through the afterlife and watched over mummification rituals. Since jackals often roamed near cemeteries in the desert, Egyptians connected the animal with death and burial. The god Thoth, often shown with the head of an ibis bird, represented knowledge, writing, science, and wisdom. Egyptian scribes considered Thoth their divine protector. Meanwhile, Horus represented kingship and the sky itself. His falcon eyes symbolized the sun and moon. Pharaohs often identified themselves with Horus during life, and perhaps one of the most feared gods was Seth, linked to deserts, storms, violence, and chaos. Yet even Seth had a role within the cosmic order. The Egyptians understood that balance required opposing forces: life and death, order and chaos, light and darkness, fertility and desert. This understanding shaped their entire worldview. To honor the gods, Egyptians built enormous temples across the kingdom. Unlike modern religious buildings designed mainly for large public gatherings, Egyptian temples functioned as sacred homes for the gods themselves. Inside the darkest inner chambers stood statues believed to physically house divine presence. Only priests and selected officials could enter the most sacred areas. Every day,
priests performed rituals to care for the gods. They washed sacred statues, dressed them in fine clothing, burned incense, offered food, and recited prayers. To the Egyptians, these rituals helped maintain harmony between the human world and the divine world. Some temples became unbelievably massive. The temple complex at Karnak, near Thebes, expanded for centuries and eventually became one of the largest religious structures ever built. Gigantic stone columns rose like forests toward the sky. Walls were covered with carvings describing battles, rituals, offerings, and royal achievements. The scale was overwhelming. Walking through Karnak today still creates a feeling of awe. The towering columns seem almost impossible for ancient people to have constructed without modern machinery. Yet generation after generation of Egyptian builders slowly expanded the sacred complex over hundreds of years. At Luxor Temple, long rows of statues and massive gateways called pylons lined ceremonial pathways illuminated during religious festivals. During one important festival called the Opet Festival, sacred statues of the gods traveled by boat along the Nile, accompanied by music, dancing, priests, and enormous crowds celebrating divine renewal. Religion in Egypt was not silent or distant. It was colorful, emotional, public, and deeply woven into daily existence. Music echoed through temple courtyards. Incense filled the air. Priests carried sacred objects beneath blazing sunlight, while ordinary people gathered to witness divine ceremonies. Even animals became sacred symbols, connected to particular gods. Cats were associated with the goddess Bastet and became beloved protectors of homes. Killing a cat, even accidentally, could lead to severe punishment. Ibises represented Thoth. Falcons symbolized Horus. Crocodiles represented Sobek. Bulls symbolized strength and fertility. Some sacred animals were even mummified after death. Archaeologists have discovered enormous underground catacombs filled with mummified cats, birds, crocodiles, and other animals offered to the gods. The Egyptians saw divinity reflected throughout nature itself, and everywhere around them stood reminders of eternity. Towering obelisks carved from single pieces of stone pointed upward toward the heavens. Temple walls preserved stories in hieroglyphics. Sacred statues watched silently across centuries. The entire civilization seemed built around one enormous goal: to preserve order against chaos, to connect humanity with the divine, and to ensure that even after death, life would continue forever beneath the eternal stars of Egypt. Ancient Egypt was a civilization built not only with stone, but with words. Across temple walls, tomb chambers, statues, obelisks, and papyrus scrolls, the Egyptians covered their world with writing. These symbols preserved prayers, royal decrees, myths, scientific observations, and stories meant to survive for eternity. To modern eyes, Egyptian hieroglyphics can appear mysterious and almost magical. Birds, eyes, snakes, human figures, strange symbols carved carefully into stone thousands of years ago. But to the Egyptians, this writing system was sacred. The word hieroglyph itself comes from Greek and means sacred carving. The Egyptians believed writing was a divine gift given by the god Thoth, master of wisdom and knowledge. Writing held enormous power. A name carved into stone could survive long after death. A prayer written on a tomb wall could guide a soul safely through the afterlife. A king's achievements recorded in hieroglyphics could preserve his memory forever. Because of this, scribes became some of the most respected people in Egyptian society. Most ordinary Egyptians could not read or write. Literacy required years of training and discipline. Young boys chosen for scribal education spent countless hours memorizing symbols, practicing handwriting, and copying texts onto papyrus sheets. Their work was difficult. Egyptian hieroglyphics contained hundreds of symbols representing sounds, ideas, objects, and combinations of meanings. A single mistake could completely change the meaning of a sentence. Yet becoming a scribe offered enormous advantages. Scribes worked indoors rather than laboring beneath the desert sun. They served in government offices, temples, military administration, and royal courts. Some eventually became powerful advisors close to the pharaoh himself. Ancient Egyptian texts often praised the scribal profession. One famous document advised students to become scribes because every other profession involved exhausting physical labor. The message was clear. Knowledge created power. The Egyptians wrote on many surfaces, but one of the most important was papyrus. Papyrus was made from reeds growing along the Nile River. Workers sliced the plant into thin strips, layered them together, pressed them flat, and dried them into sheets. This became one of the world's earliest forms of paper. Using reed pens and ink, scribes recorded enormous amounts of information: government records, medical instructions, religious texts, mathematics, stories, poetry, tax lists, astronomical observations. Entire libraries of knowledge existed within temple complexes and royal archives. Some surviving papyrus scrolls reveal how advanced Egyptian understanding truly was. Egyptian doctors performed surprisingly sophisticated medical treatments. They treated wounds, set broken bones, stitched injuries, and described illnesses with careful observation. Some medical texts even separated supernatural explanations from practical treatments. Doctors understood the importance of cleanliness for treating injuries long before modern germ theory existed. Meanwhile, Egyptian mathematicians developed methods for measuring land, calculating taxes, and designing massive architectural projects. Without mathematics, the pyramids and temples could never have been built. Astronomy also played a major role in Egyptian life. Priests carefully observed the stars and planetary movements. They used astronomy to predict the Nile flood season and organize the calendar. One particularly important star was Sirius. Each year, the heliacal rising of Sirius, its first appearance before sunrise after a period of invisibility, closely matched the arrival of the Nile floods. This celestial event became deeply important in Egyptian timekeeping and religion. The Egyptians divided the year into 365 days, remarkably close to the actual solar year. This calendar helped organize agriculture, religious festivals, and government administration. At night, Egyptian priests observed constellations crossing the dark desert sky. To them, the heavens were not empty space. They were sacred realms filled with divine meaning. Even the movement of the sun across the sky became part of a cosmic story. Ra sailed across heaven by day and journeyed through the underworld by night, before rising again each dawn. The Egyptians viewed time itself as cyclical. The Nile flooded again and again. The sun rose again and again. Crops returned after every harvest. Life followed repeating rhythms of renewal and rebirth. This cyclical understanding shaped their philosophy and religion deeply. And nowhere was this connection between writing and eternity more visible than inside tombs. Walls were covered with spells from texts modern historians call the Book of the Dead. These writings were not a single fixed book, but collections of magical instructions designed to help souls navigate the dangers of the afterlife. Some spells protected against monsters, others helped souls pass divine judgment. Some ensured the dead would have food, water, and protection forever. Words themselves became tools of survival beyond death. The Egyptians believed speaking or writing something could give it real power. This belief explains why hieroglyphics were carved so carefully into monuments intended to last forever. Even today, many inscriptions remain astonishingly clear, despite surviving for thousands of years beneath wind, sand, and blazing sunlight. But eventually, knowledge of hieroglyphics disappeared. After the decline of ancient Egyptian civilization, fewer people could read the old sacred symbols. Over centuries, the language itself faded from use. By the Middle Ages, nobody fully understood hieroglyphics anymore. The writings became silent mysteries carved into stone. Then, in 1799, everything changed. French soldiers in Egypt discovered the Rosetta Stone, a black stone slab containing the same text written in 3 scripts, including Greek and hieroglyphics. Because scholars could already read Greek, the Rosetta Stone became the key to unlocking the ancient language. A French scholar named Jean-François Champollion eventually deciphered the system in the 1820s. Suddenly, after centuries of silence, ancient Egypt could speak again. Temple walls revealed forgotten histories. Tombs revealed prayers and personal stories. Pharaohs, whose voices had vanished thousands of years earlier, could once again be understood. It was one of the greatest intellectual discoveries in human history. The dead civilization had found its voice once more. When most people imagine ancient Egypt, they think first of pyramids, pharaohs, and golden treasures. But the vast majority of Egyptians were not kings or priests. They were ordinary people, farmers, fishermen, bakers, potters, builders, mothers, children. And for thousands of years, daily life beside the Nile followed rhythms that changed very little from generation to generation. Most Egyptians lived in small villages built close to the Nile River. Their homes were usually made from mud bricks, created by mixing Nile mud with straw and drying the mixture beneath the hot desert sun. Stone was reserved mainly for temples, tombs, and monuments intended to last forever. Ordinary houses were practical rather than grand. Many contained simple rooms surrounding small courtyards where families cooked, worked, and escaped the heat during cooler evening hours. Roofs were often flat and could serve as sleeping areas during hot nights when indoor temperatures became uncomfortable. Life for ordinary Egyptians revolved around agriculture. The Nile determined everything. When floodwaters arrived, fields disappeared beneath water and farming temporarily paused. During this period, many laborers worked on state projects such as canals, temples, or pyramids. When the flood receded, farmers planted crops into the rich black soil left behind by the river. Wheat and barley became the foundation of Egyptian life. Bread was eaten daily by nearly everyone, regardless of social class. Beer was also extremely important. Unlike modern beer, Egyptian beer was thick and nutritious, almost like liquid bread. Even children drank weaker versions because clean water could sometimes be difficult to store safely. Vegetables, such as onions, garlic, beans, and lettuce, were common foods. Wealthier families occasionally ate meat from cattle, ducks, or geese, while poorer people relied more heavily on fish from the Nile. The river provided endless resources. Fish filled the waters. Papyrus reeds lined the banks. Birds nested among marshes. Boats moved constantly along the current, carrying grain, stone, animals, and travelers. For ordinary people, the Nile was not simply scenery, it was survival itself. Children in ancient Egypt often worked from a young age, helping their families with farming, fishing, or household duties. Yet there were also moments of recreation and joy. Archaeologists have discovered toys, dolls, balls, board games, musical instruments, and artwork showing dancing and celebrations. One popular board game was called Senet. The game involved moving pieces across a grid-like board and may have symbolized the soul's journey through the afterlife. Music also played a major role in Egyptian society. Harps, flutes, drums, and rattles accompanied festivals, religious ceremonies, banquets, and family celebrations. Paintings inside tombs often show musicians entertaining guests while dancers move gracefully beside them. Egyptian clothing was designed for the hot climate. Most garments were made from linen woven from flax plants. Wealthy Egyptians wore fine white linen carefully pleated and decorated with jewelry, while ordinary workers wore simpler clothing. Because of the intense heat, many people shaved their heads and wore wigs during formal occasions. Cosmetics were also common for both men and women. Black eyeliner, called kohl, protected the eyes from sunlight and may have helped reduce infections. Perfumes and oils were used frequently, especially among wealthier classes. To modern people, ancient Egypt can sometimes appear distant and strange. But in many ways, ordinary Egyptian families were deeply familiar. Parents loved their children. Families gathered for meals. Friends celebrated together. People worried about illness, harvests, work, and the future. Love poems survive from ancient Egypt, expressing tenderness and longing, remarkably similar to modern emotions. One poem compares a beloved person to the brightest star in the sky. Another describes the joy of simply hearing someone's voice. Across thousands of years, human emotions remain surprisingly unchanged. Marriage in Egypt was generally practical, but often affectionate. Women in Egyptian society possessed more legal rights than women in many other ancient civilizations. They could own property, inherit wealth, initiate divorce, and manage businesses. Queens and noblewomen occasionally became extremely influential. Yet life for ordinary people could also be difficult. Medical knowledge existed, but disease remained common. Injuries from labor could be severe. Droughts or poor floods sometimes caused famine and hardship. The desert climate could be brutal. And despite Egypt's long periods of stability, invasions, political struggles, and wars occasionally disrupted ordinary life. Still, compared to many ancient societies, Egypt remained remarkably stable for incredibly long stretches of time. Generation after generation lived beneath the same rhythms of flood, planting, harvest, and worship. The continuity of Egyptian civilization became one of its defining features. Even Egyptian art reflected this stability. For centuries, artistic styles changed very slowly. Human figures were drawn according to strict conventions. Kings appeared in idealized forms. Gods remained recognizable through sacred symbols and poses. This consistency reinforced the Egyptian desire for order and permanence. They valued stability over constant change. The afterlife itself reflected ordinary life beside the Nile. Tomb paintings often showed peaceful scenes of farming, fishing, hunting birds in marshes, preparing meals, or enjoying banquets. The Egyptians hoped eternity would continue the best parts of earthly existence forever. To modern eyes, this vision of the afterlife feels surprisingly human. Not an abstract paradise floating beyond reality, but a continuation of familiar joys: family, food, music, peace, beauty. As evening fell across ancient Egypt, the heat of the day slowly faded. Oil lamps flickered inside mud brick homes. Families gathered together. The stars emerged above the desert. Priests performed nighttime rituals inside distant temples, while the Nile flowed silently through the darkness. And across the riverbanks, beneath one of the clearest night skies on Earth, millions of ordinary people lived their lives, unaware that thousands of years later, the world would still remember their civilization with awe. For much of its history, ancient Egypt was protected naturally by geography. To the west stretched endless desert. To the east lay harsh wilderness and the Red Sea. To the north stood the Mediterranean, and to the south, dangerous cataracts blocked easy invasion along the Nile. These natural barriers helped Egypt remain isolated and stable for centuries. But eventually, the outside world began pressing closer, and Egypt transformed from a peaceful river civilization into a powerful military empire. One of the greatest turning points came during a period known as the Second Intermediate Period. Around 1650 BCE, foreign rulers called the Hyksos gained control over parts of northern Egypt. The Hyksos introduced important military technologies unfamiliar to many Egyptians at the time: horse-drawn chariots, composite bows, advanced bronze weapons. For the Egyptians, this foreign occupation was deeply humiliating. But it also forced change. Eventually, Egyptian rulers from the south organized resistance and drove the Hyksos out of the country. This victory transformed Egypt forever. The pharaohs realized isolation alone could no longer guarantee safety. Instead, Egypt would need military strength beyond its borders. And so began the era known as the New Kingdom, often considered the Golden Age of ancient Egypt. During this period, Egyptian armies marched far beyond the Nile Valley. To the south, they expanded deep into Nubia, a region rich in gold, ivory, and valuable trade goods. To the north, they campaigned into the Near East, including parts of modern Syria and Palestine. Egypt became an empire. At the center of this military transformation stood one revolutionary machine: the chariot. Light, fast, and deadly, Egyptian war chariots became symbols of royal power. Teams of horses pulled lightweight wooden vehicles carrying archers armed with powerful composite bows, capable of piercing armor at great distances. Pharaohs were often shown charging into battle aboard chariots, firing arrows while enemies scattered before them. Whether these artistic scenes were fully realistic or partly symbolic, they projected an image of unstoppable strength. One famous military ruler was Thutmose III. Sometimes called the Napoleon of Egypt, Thutmose III led numerous successful military campaigns and greatly expanded Egyptian territory.
His armies traveled incredible distances for the ancient world. Campaign records carved into temple walls describe battles, captured cities, tribute payments, and foreign rulers forced to submit before Egyptian power. Yet war in the ancient world was brutal. Soldiers marched beneath scorching desert heat, carrying weapons, shields, and supplies over enormous distances. Battles were chaotic and terrifying. Archers filled the air with arrows. Chariots thundered across open ground. Bronze swords and spears clashed together amid dust and screaming. Victory brought glory and wealth. Defeat could mean death, slavery, or destruction. One of the most famous battles in ancient Egyptian history occurred during the reign of Ramesses II at the Battle of Kadesh around 1274 BCE. The Egyptian army fought against a powerful Hittite empire near modern-day Syria. Ramesses later covered temple walls with dramatic scenes portraying himself heroically defeating overwhelming enemies. The truth was likely more complicated. Many historians believe the battle ended closer to a draw than a decisive Egyptian victory. But the aftermath became historically important for another reason. Egypt and the Hittites eventually signed one of the world's earliest known peace treaties. Copies of the treaty survive even today. It reminds us that diplomacy and negotiation existed alongside warfare, even in the ancient world. The Egyptian military required enormous organization. Armies needed food supplies, weapons, transportation, communication systems, and trained officers. Scribes carefully recorded troop numbers, equipment lists, and captured goods. Fortresses guarded borders and trade routes. Naval fleets protected the Nile and coastal regions. War became part of the machinery of empire. And yet, despite their military strength, Egyptian rulers still saw themselves as protectors of cosmic order rather than mere conquerors. Temple inscriptions often described foreign enemies as forces of chaos, threatening Ma'at, the sacred balance of the universe. Defeating these enemies symbolized the triumph of order over disorder. This religious interpretation gave warfare moral and spiritual significance. Victorious kings did not simply win battles, they restored harmony to the world. Foreign lands also brought new influences into Egypt. Trade expanded dramatically during the New Kingdom period. Ships arrived carrying cedar wood from Lebanon, incense from Arabia, gold from Nubia, exotic animals, wine, oils, precious stones, and luxury goods from distant regions. Egypt became connected to a larger international world stretching across the eastern Mediterranean and Near East. Foreign ambassadors visited royal courts, diplomatic marriages united kingdoms, gifts passed between rulers across enormous distances. Letters written on clay tablets reveal kings negotiating alliances, requesting gold, arranging marriages, and complaining about delayed shipments thousands of years ago. Even ancient empires struggled with politics and bureaucracy. Yet military expansion also carried costs. Maintaining armies and distant territories required enormous wealth and constant effort. As centuries passed, internal struggles, economic problems, invasions, and political instability gradually weakened Egyptian power. New rivals emerged. The Assyrians invaded. Later came the Persians. Eventually, Alexander the Great conquered Egypt, bringing Greek influence into the ancient kingdom. And still later,
Egypt became part of the Roman Empire itself. The age of the Pharaohs slowly faded. But even as dynasties collapsed and foreign rulers arrived, the monuments remained. Temples still stood beside the Nile. Hieroglyphics still covered ancient walls. Colossal statues still stared silently across the desert. The military empires of Egypt rose and fell like all empires eventually do. Yet the civilization itself left something more enduring than conquest. A vision of eternity carved into stone beneath the endless desert sky. Ancient Egypt is often remembered through its monuments. The pyramids, the temples, the colossal statues rising above the desert. But beyond these famous structures existed entire cities filled with ordinary life. Bustling streets, crowded marketplaces, fishing boats drifting along the Nile. Bakers preparing bread before sunrise. Children running through dusty alleyways, while merchants shouted prices beneath the hot Egyptian sun. One of the most important cities in Egyptian history was Thebes, known today as Luxor. Located in Upper Egypt beside the Nile, Thebes became the religious heart of the new kingdom. Gigantic temple complexes rose along the riverbanks. At Karnak, enormous columns towered overhead like stone forests. At Luxor Temple, sacred processions moved through avenues lined with sphinx statues. Across the Nile, hidden among desert cliffs, lay the Valley of the Kings, where pharaohs were buried deep inside secret tombs. The city pulsed with religious activity. Priests carried sacred statues during festivals, while incense smoke drifted through temple courtyards. Musicians played drums and harps. Crowds gathered beneath banners in torchlight during celebrations honoring the gods. Yet Thebes was not only a religious city. It was filled with homes, workshops, markets, docks, gardens, and busy streets where ordinary people lived their lives. Farther north stood Memphis, one of Egypt's oldest capitals. For centuries, Memphis served as a political and administrative center near the Nile Delta. The city connected Upper and Lower Egypt and became a strategic hub for trade, government, and royal authority. Though little survives above ground today, ancient writers described Memphis as enormous and wealthy. Nearby stood the pyramids of Giza and Saqqara, linking the living city directly with the sacred world of the dead. Egyptian cities were alive with sound and movement. Donkeys carried goods through crowded streets. Potters shaped clay vessels. Smiths hammered bronze tools and weapons. Scribes sat beneath shaded areas recording taxes and trade transactions onto papyrus scrolls. Along the Nile itself, constant activity unfolded. Fishing boats drifted along the current. Larger cargo ships transported grain, stone, cattle, and luxury goods between cities. Sailors adjusted linen sails while workers loaded heavy supplies beneath blazing sunlight. The river never truly slept. Markets were especially important in Egyptian daily life. Merchants sold vegetables, bread, fish, linen clothing, jewelry, oils, perfumes, and imported goods from distant lands. Because coinage did not exist during much of Egyptian history, trade often worked through barter systems. Grain especially functioned as a form of economic value. Workers could even be paid partially in bread and beer. For ordinary families, life revolved around practical routines. Women ground grain into flour using heavy grinding stones. Bread baked inside clay ovens, while beer fermented in large jars nearby. Water was carried from wells or directly from the Nile. Clothing was washed by hand beneath the heat of the sun. Daily labor could be exhausting, especially during the hottest months. And yet, Egyptian art often portrays scenes filled with remarkable warmth and beauty. Families sit together during meals, musicians entertain guests, dancers perform gracefully during celebrations. Children play games beside pools filled with lotus flowers. The Egyptians clearly valued beauty in daily life. Gardens became symbols of peace and luxury. Wealthier homes sometimes contained pools surrounded by trees, flowers, and shaded walkways where people could escape the desert heat. Lotus flowers held special symbolic meaning, representing rebirth and creation. Even architecture reflected Egypt's climate and environment. Many homes used thick mud brick walls to keep interiors cooler during intense heat. Small windows reduced sunlight, while flat roofs provided sleeping areas during warm nights. At sunset, temperatures finally dropped. The harsh brightness of the day softened into golden evening light, reflecting across the Nile waters. Families gathered together while oil lamps flickered gently inside homes. Above them stretched one of the clearest night skies on Earth. Far from modern light pollution, ancient Egyptians could see thousands of stars scattered across the darkness. The Milky Way itself appeared bright and unmistakable. Astronomy became deeply connected to religion, partly because the skies over Egypt were so extraordinary. The stars seemed close enough to touch. For ordinary Egyptians, these celestial patterns carried spiritual meaning. The heavens were not empty space. They were realms of divine order and eternal cycles. And beneath those stars, life continued year after year, with remarkable continuity. Children grew into adults. Families farmed the same land for generations. Priests repeated ancient rituals, unchanged across centuries. Egyptian civilization became one of the longest-lasting, stable civilizations in human history. Part of this stability came from geography and the Nile, but part also came from the Egyptian desire for continuity itself. They valued tradition. They respected the past deeply. Many Egyptians believed the ideal way of life had already been established by ancestors and gods long ago. The goal was not constant change or innovation, but maintaining harmony and balance. This mindset shaped everything from religion to art to government. And for thousands of years, it worked. Empires elsewhere rose and collapsed rapidly, while Egypt endured generation after generation beside the eternal river. Even today, when people imagine ancient civilization, many instinctively picture Egypt first. The pyramids, the pharaohs, the golden deserts, the Nile glowing beneath sunset skies. Something about ancient Egypt continues to feel timeless, as though part of that ancient world still survives quietly beneath the drifting sands and the endless stars above the river. As centuries passed, Egyptian rulers began changing the way they prepared for eternity. The Great Pyramids still stood proudly across the desert, but they had one enormous problem. Everyone could see them, and where treasures existed, tomb robbers eventually followed. Many royal pyramids were looted not long after the pharaohs were buried inside them. Gold vanished. Sacred objects disappeared. Burial chambers were broken open by thieves searching for wealth hidden beneath stone. For rulers obsessed with eternal preservation, this was a disaster. And so, during the New Kingdom period, Egyptian pharaohs chose a different strategy. Instead of building gigantic pyramids visible for miles across the desert, they began hiding their tombs deep within isolated cliffs west of Thebes. This hidden royal cemetery became known as the Valley of the Kings. At first glance, the valley appears quiet and empty, a barren landscape of pale rock, dry heat, and steep desert hills beneath a blazing sky.
But hidden beneath the cliffs lies one of the greatest collections of royal tombs ever created. More than 60 tombs have been discovered there so far. Pharaohs of the New Kingdom, including rulers like Tutankhamun, Seti I, and Ramesses II, were buried within these hidden chambers. The tombs were carved directly into solid rock. Long corridors descended deep underground, leading toward burial chambers, decorated with astonishing artwork and sacred texts. Walls glowed with painted scenes even after thousands of years. Gods, stars, solar boats, serpents, sacred symbols, entire maps of the afterlife stretched across the stone surfaces, guiding the dead king through eternity. The Egyptians believed the afterlife was dangerous. The soul had to pass through gates, avoid monsters, answer divine questions, and survive trials before reaching eternal peace. Tomb decorations were not simply artistic, they were practical guides for survival beyond death.
Some tomb ceilings were painted dark blue and covered with golden stars, transforming underground chambers into symbolic versions of the night sky itself. Others contained detailed scenes from religious books describing the journey of the sun god through the underworld each night. The deeper archaeologists explore these tombs, the more personal ancient Egypt sometimes feels. Workers left fingerprints in plaster. Ancient graffiti survives in hidden corners. Abandoned tools remain where laborers once set them down thousands of years ago. The Valley of the Kings was not built by slaves chained in darkness, as popular myths often suggest. Instead, highly skilled craftsmen and artists worked carefully under royal supervision. Many lived in a nearby village called Deir el-Medina. This settlement housed the elite workers responsible for constructing and decorating royal tombs. Because the dry Egyptian climate preserved organic materials so well, archaeologists have learned extraordinary details about their lives. We know what they ate. We know what arguments they had. We even possess records of workers going on strike when food payments were delayed. Perhaps the earliest recorded labor strike in human history. These craftsmen were highly respected because their work carried sacred importance. They painted delicate scenes by oil lamp deep underground in narrow chambers filled with heat and dust. And the quality of their work remains astonishing even today. Colors painted over 3,000 years ago still appear vivid beneath flashlight beams. The secrecy surrounding royal tombs became increasingly important. Workers swore oaths. Tomb entrances were concealed. Corridors twisted unpredictably to confuse robbers. Massive stone doors blocked passageways. Yet despite these efforts, most royal tombs were eventually looted anyway. Gold and precious materials proved too tempting. Over centuries, political instability and economic hardship encouraged theft even among officials responsible for protecting the tombs. By the time modern archaeology began exploring the valley seriously, many tombs had already been emptied long ago. But one extraordinary discovery changed everything. In 1922, British archaeologist Howard Carter uncovered the nearly intact tomb of Tutankhamun. After years of searching, Carter finally discovered steps leading downward beneath the desert floor. When he peered through a small opening into the sealed chamber, he reportedly described seeing wonderful things.
And indeed, the treasures inside stunned the world. Golden shrines filled the rooms. Jewelry glittered in darkness, untouched for millennia. Chariots, statues, ceremonial beds, weapons, and sacred objects crowded the chambers. At the center rested Tutankhamun's famous golden mask, one of the greatest masterpieces of ancient art ever discovered. The discovery created worldwide fascination with ancient Egypt. Newspapers across the globe covered every detail. Museums filled with visitors, eager to glimpse objects surviving from the age of the pharaohs. But alongside excitement came something else: the legend of the mummy's curse. After several people connected to the excavation died unexpectedly over subsequent years, rumors spread, claiming the tomb carried supernatural punishment against those who disturbed the dead. Newspapers amplified the story dramatically. In reality, most historians view the curse as myth and sensationalism. Many individuals connected to the tomb lived long, healthy lives afterward. Yet the idea captured public imagination powerfully, because deep down, ancient Egyptian tombs still feel mysterious. To enter one is to step into a world built entirely around eternity. The silence inside these chambers feels different somehow. The air is dry and still. Painted figures stare outward across thousands of years. Sacred texts cover walls created for souls long vanished from the earth. And everywhere remains the same ancient human desire: to survive death, to be remembered, to leave behind something lasting beneath the endless desert sky. No civilization lasts forever. Even ancient Egypt, one of the longest-lasting civilizations in human history, eventually began to change, weaken, and slowly fade. For thousands of years, the Nile kingdom had survived invasions, famines, dynastic struggles, and political upheaval. But time itself is relentless. As centuries passed, Egypt faced increasing pressure from foreign powers. To the northeast, new empires rose across the Near East. Powerful armies equipped with advanced weapons challenged Egypt's dominance. The Assyrians invaded. Later came the Persians. Each conquest weakened the independence of the ancient kingdom. Yet perhaps the most dramatic transformation arrived in 332 BCE with a young conqueror from Macedonia. Alexander the Great entered Egypt almost without resistance. To many Egyptians, Alexander appeared not merely as a foreign invader, but as a liberator from Persian rule. He was welcomed as pharaoh. Priests honored him within temples, and during his brief time in Egypt, Alexander founded a city that would become one of the greatest centers of knowledge in the ancient world: Alexandria. Located near the Mediterranean coast, Alexandria quickly grew into a magnificent city, filled with palaces, libraries, temples, and harbors crowded with ships from across the known world. Greek culture blended with Egyptian traditions, creating something entirely new. At the center of Alexandria stood the famous Library of Alexandria, perhaps the greatest collection of knowledge in the ancient world. Scholars gathered there to study mathematics, astronomy, medicine, philosophy, literature, and geography. Books and scrolls arrived from distant kingdoms. Intellectuals debated ideas beneath marble columns, while ships carried goods and knowledge across the Mediterranean Sea. Nearby rose another wonder of the ancient world: the Lighthouse of Alexandria. This enormous tower guided ships safely into the harbor and became one of the tallest human-made structures on Earth. For centuries,
Its fire burned above the sea, visible from great distances at night. After Alexander's death, Egypt came under the control of the Ptolemaic dynasty, Greek rulers descended from one of Alexander's generals. These rulers adopted many Egyptian customs while maintaining strong Greek influence throughout the kingdom. And among them emerged one of the most famous women in history, Cleopatra VII. Modern popular culture often focuses mainly on Cleopatra's beauty and romance. But in reality, she was highly intelligent, politically skilled, and multilingual. She spoke several languages, including Egyptian itself, something many earlier Ptolemaic rulers had not done. Cleopatra fought desperately to preserve Egypt's independence during an era when Rome was becoming the dominant power in the Mediterranean world. She formed alliances with powerful Roman leaders, including Julius Caesar, and later Mark Antony. But in the end, Egypt could not resist Rome's expansion. After the defeat of Antony and Cleopatra at the Battle of Actium in 31 BCE, Egypt became part of the Roman Empire. The age of the Pharaohs had effectively ended. For the first time in thousands of years, Egypt was no longer ruled by its own ancient dynasties. Yet even under Roman control, much of Egyptian culture survived for centuries. Temples still functioned. Priests still performed rituals. Hieroglyphics still covered sacred walls. The Nile still flooded each year as it always had. But slowly, the old world faded. Christianity spread through Egypt during the Roman period, gradually replacing ancient religious traditions. Temples closed. Priestly knowledge disappeared. Hieroglyphic writing fell out of use. Eventually, nobody remained who could read the sacred symbols carved across temple walls and tombs. The voices of ancient Egypt fell silent. Massive monuments endured, but their meanings became mysterious. Travelers stared at pyramids and statues without fully understanding who built them or why. Sand slowly buried forgotten cities and temples. For centuries, ancient Egypt became a shadow of memory. And yet, it never truly disappeared. The pyramids remained standing against the horizon. The Sphinx continued staring silently eastward across the desert. Colossal statues survived storms, invasions, earthquakes, and empires rising and collapsing around them. There was something about Egypt that humanity could not forget completely. Perhaps because Egyptian civilization touched something timeless. Its monuments were built not merely for practicality, but for eternity itself. Even today, thousands of years later, people still travel across the world to stand beside the pyramids. Tourists walk through Karnak Temple in awe beneath giant stone columns. Visitors stare silently at Tutankhamun's golden mask behind museum glass. Ancient Egypt continues to fascinate humanity in a way few civilizations ever have. Part of that fascination comes from mystery. So much remains unanswered. How exactly were certain monuments constructed? What secrets remain hidden beneath desert sands? How many tombs remain undiscovered? But another part comes from something deeper. Ancient Egypt represents humanity's desire to leave something permanent behind, to resist time, to preserve memory against death and decay. The Egyptians carved names into stone because they feared being forgotten, and, in an extraordinary way, they succeeded. Thousands of years later, the names of pharaohs still survive. Khufu, Hatshepsut, Ramesses, Tutankhamun, Cleopatra. Their civilization still speaks across time through monuments, art, and stories preserved beneath the desert sky. As night settles once more across the Nile Valley, the ancient world feels strangely close. The stars shine above the pyramids, just as they did thousands of years ago. The river still flows northward toward the sea. Desert winds still move softly across forgotten ruins buried beneath sand. And somewhere within the silence of those ruins remains the enduring spirit of one of humanity's greatest civilizations. Even after centuries of exploration, ancient Egypt still hides countless secrets beneath the desert sands. For every temple uncovered, there may be others still buried. For every tomb discovered, many more may remain hidden, deep beneath cliffs and forgotten valleys, untouched for thousands of years. This mystery is part of what keeps Egypt alive in the human imagination. The civilization feels unfinished somehow, as though the desert itself is still protecting pieces of the ancient world from modern eyes. Archaeologists working in Egypt often describe a strange feeling while excavating ancient sites. One moment, they stand beneath empty desert skies, surrounded only by sand and silence. Then, slowly, carefully brushing away dust, grain by grain, entire lost worlds begin to emerge. A buried staircase, a painted wall, a forgotten name carved into stone. Objects untouched since the age of the Pharaohs suddenly return to light after thousands of years in darkness. The dry Egyptian climate preserved remarkable things that would have vanished almost anywhere else on earth. Wooden furniture survived. Linen clothing survived. Food offerings remained inside sealed tombs. Even flowers placed beside mummies sometimes survived in fragile form across millennia. Time moves differently in the desert. One of the most fascinating discoveries in modern archaeology occurred not inside royal tombs, but in ordinary villages. At sites like Deir el-Medina, archaeologists uncovered records revealing intimate details about daily Egyptian life. Personal letters survived. Shopping lists survived. Complaints about neighbors survived. Suddenly, ancient Egyptians no longer seemed like distant mythological figures carved into temple walls. They became real human beings again. Workers argued over wages. Parents worried about children. Families celebrated festivals. People became sick, fell in love, made jokes, and struggled through ordinary life, much like people today. This is one of archaeology's greatest powers. It restores humanity to the past. The further scientists study Egypt, the more complex the civilization becomes. For many years, popular imagination portrayed ancient Egypt as static and unchanging. But reality was far more dynamic. Dynasties rose and collapsed. Religious beliefs evolved. Artistic styles shifted subtly over centuries. Political conflicts reshaped entire periods of history. Ancient Egypt lasted so long that it contained enormous internal diversity across time. The distance between the first pyramids and Cleopatra is actually greater than the distance between Cleopatra and the modern world today. This realization surprises many people. Ancient Egypt was already ancient to Cleopatra herself. The pyramids at Giza were built over 2,000 years before her lifetime. To her, they were monuments from a distant and mysterious past, just as they are to us now. And still, discoveries continue. Hidden chambers detected beneath pyramids using modern scanning technology. New tombs uncovered beneath desert sands. Ancient DNA studies helping scientists understand royal family relationships and diseases. Even satellite imagery now helps archaeologists identify buried cities invisible from the ground. Technology continues revealing new pieces of the ancient world, yet some mysteries remain stubbornly unsolved. Exactly how certain massive stones were transported and lifted still inspires debate. Some religious practices remain only partially understood. Many ancient texts survive only in fragments. Countless tombs were looted long ago, erasing parts of history forever. There are gaps in the story that may never fully be filled, and perhaps that mystery is part of Egypt's enduring power. Human beings are naturally drawn toward civilizations that feel larger than ordinary history. The pyramids rising from empty deserts, hidden chambers beneath cliffs, golden masks staring outward from another age. Ancient Egypt feels suspended somewhere between history and myth, especially at night. Imagine now the desert after sunset. The burning heat of the day has faded. Cool air drifts quietly across the sand. The pyramids stand dark against the stars. The Nile reflects faint moonlight as it flows silently northward. Far away, jackals cry softly in the darkness. The temples are empty now. The priests are gone. The pharaohs are gone. And yet the monuments remain. Stone columns still rise beneath the night sky exactly where ancient builders placed them thousands of years ago. Hieroglyphics still cover hidden walls deep underground where no sunlight reaches. The civilization itself may have faded, but its presence still lingers. Perhaps this is because the Egyptians built not only for their own time, but for eternity. They believed memory itself had power. To speak someone's name was to keep them alive. To preserve a body was to preserve identity. To carve words into stone was to protect them against time. In many ways, they succeeded beyond imagination. Their names still survive. Their stories still survive. Their monuments continue inspiring awe across the world thousands of years after the last pharaoh disappeared into history. And somewhere beneath the sands tonight, hidden chambers may still wait silently in darkness, undiscovered, unopened, holding secrets from one of humanity's greatest civilizations beneath the eternal stars of Egypt. Even though ancient Egypt disappeared as a political civilization long ago, its influence never truly vanished. In many ways, the ancient kingdom beside the Nile still shapes the modern world quietly, even today. Egyptian architecture inspired later civilizations across thousands of years. The Greeks admired Egyptian temples and monuments. The Romans carried obelisks from Egypt back to Rome as symbols of imperial power. Even now, ancient Egyptian designs appear in museums, government buildings, cemeteries, and monuments across the world. Tall stone obelisks still stand in cities far from the Nile. Massive columns inspired by Egyptian temples appear in modern architecture. The visual language of ancient Egypt somehow continues, surviving through stone and shape long after the civilization itself faded. The same is true for knowledge. Egyptian mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and engineering influenced later cultures throughout the Mediterranean world. Greek scholars studying in Alexandria absorbed ideas preserved through centuries of Egyptian learning. the Library of Alexandria became one of humanity's greatest centers of intellectual exchange, connecting knowledge from Egypt, Greece, Persia, India, and beyond. Though the Great Library was eventually lost, its legend still represents humanity's desire to collect and preserve wisdom. Even timekeeping itself carries echoes of ancient Egypt. The 365-day calendar, developed by Egyptian astronomers, helped shape later calendar systems used throughout the world today. Their careful observations of stars and seasonal cycles allowed agriculture and government to function with remarkable precision for thousands of years. And perhaps most importantly, ancient Egypt changed humanity's understanding of permanence. The pyramids proved that human beings could create structures capable of surviving immense stretches of time. When modern people stand before the Great Pyramid of Giza, they are not merely observing architecture. They are confronting deep time itself. The pyramid already stood ancient when Rome was founded. It already stood ancient when medieval kingdoms rose across Europe. It has survived while entire civilizations disappeared around it. There is something humbling about that realization. Human life feels brief compared to stone shaped for eternity. Ancient Egypt also transformed modern archaeology. The discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922 created global fascination with preserving and studying ancient civilizations scientifically, rather than simply collecting treasures. Museums expanded Egyptian collections. Universities created Egyptology departments. Archaeologists began documenting ancient sites with increasing care and precision. The world realized that Egypt was not merely a source of treasure. It was a record of human civilization itself. And yet, Egypt's influence extends beyond science and history. It survives emotionally, too. Something about ancient Egypt continues capturing imagination more powerfully than almost any other civilization. Perhaps it is the combination of beauty and mystery, golden masks glowing in darkness, temples aligned beneath stars, silent statues staring across deserts. Or perhaps it is because Egyptian civilization confronted the same questions humanity still struggles with today. How do we live meaningful lives? What happens after death? How can memory survive the passage of time? The Egyptians answered these questions through monuments, rituals, stories, and symbols intended to last forever. And remarkably, many of those answers still survive. At night, modern Cairo glows with millions of lights while traffic moves endlessly through crowded streets beside the Nile. Yet not far beyond the modern city, the pyramids still stand in silence beneath the stars. The ancient and modern worlds exist side by side. Tourists photograph monuments first built before most of recorded history existed. Archaeologists continue excavating forgotten tombs, while nearby modern Egyptians live ordinary daily lives along the same river that sustained pharaohs thousands of years ago. The Nile itself remains astonishingly unchanged. It still flows northward through fertile green valleys surrounded by desert. It still brings life to Egypt, just as it always has. Farmers still work fields along its banks. Boats still drift across its waters beneath sunset skies glowing orange and gold. The continuity is extraordinary. Civilizations rise and collapse. Religions change. Languages disappear. Dynasties vanish. But the river continues. And perhaps this continuity explains why ancient Egypt feels strangely alive even now. The civilization may belong to history, but its presence remains woven into the landscape itself. The stars above Egypt tonight are the same stars ancient priests once observed from temple rooftops. The desert winds moving across the pyramids tonight are the same winds that touched the faces of pyramid builders thousands of years ago. Somewhere beneath the sands still lie forgotten names and undiscovered stories, waiting silently in darkness. Ancient Egypt reminds us that humanity has always searched for permanence within an impermanent world. The Egyptians built monuments hoping to resist time. And in some ways, they succeeded beyond anything they could have imagined. Because thousands of years later, beneath the endless night sky, humanity still remembers them. Long before telescopes, satellites, or modern astronomy, the ancient Egyptians spent countless nights studying the sky. And beneath the clear desert darkness above the Nile, they saw something extraordinary. Far from modern cities and electric lights, the Egyptian night sky appeared unbelievably bright. Thousands upon thousands of stars stretched overhead like rivers of silver light. The Milky Way itself glowed clearly across the heavens. For the Egyptians, the sky was not empty space. It was alive, sacred, eternal. The movements of stars and planets carried meaning connected directly to religion, timekeeping, kingship, and the afterlife itself. Ancient priests carefully observed celestial cycles from temple rooftops night after night. One star became especially important, Sirius. Known to the Egyptians as Sopdet, Sirius was the brightest star visible in the night sky. Each year, after disappearing temporarily from view, Sirius reappeared shortly before sunrise in an event called the Heliacal Rising. And remarkably, this event closely matched the arrival of the Nile floodwaters. To the Egyptians, this connection felt deeply sacred. The reappearance of Sirius announced renewal, fertility, and the beginning of a new agricultural cycle. The heavens themselves seemed connected directly to life beside the river. This observation helped shape the Egyptian calendar. Priests divided the year into 365 days, an astonishingly accurate system for the ancient world. Their understanding of celestial cycles allowed them to organize farming seasons, religious festivals, taxation, and royal ceremonies with remarkable precision. Astronomy became one of the foundations of Egyptian civilization. Even the pyramids themselves may reflect this celestial obsession. The Great Pyramid of Giza aligns closely with the cardinal directions, north, south, east, and west. Some researchers believe certain pyramid shafts may align with stars associated with the afterlife and royal rebirth. Whether every theory is correct or not, one thing is undeniable. The Egyptians intentionally connected architecture with the heavens. Temples were aligned carefully with sunrise positions during important times of year. At Abu Simbel, sunlight penetrates deep into the temple interior during specific solar alignments, illuminating sacred statues dramatically. The architecture itself interacted with cosmic cycles. To the Egyptians, this made perfect sense. The universe operated according to divine order. Human civilization needed to mirror that order as closely as possible. The sky also shaped Egyptian beliefs about death. The stars appeared eternal. Night after night, they returned unchanged, generation after generation. Because of this permanence, Egyptians often associated stars with immortality. Some texts described dead pharaohs ascending into the heavens to join the imperishable stars, stars that never disappeared below the horizon. The afterlife was imagined not only underground within tombs, but also above, among the eternal heavens. The goddess Nut represented the night sky itself. Egyptian artwork often portrays her body arching above the earth, covered in stars, while the sun travels through her each night before being reborn at dawn. This image beautifully reflects the Egyptian understanding of cosmic cycles. Death was not final destruction. It was transformation, renewal, continuation. Just as the sun returned every morning and the Nile flooded every year, life itself moved through endless cycles. At night, Egyptian priests tracked celestial movements carefully, using simple but effective tools. They observed constellations rising above the horizon. They measured shadows. They aligned temples and monuments according to heavenly patterns, and all of this occurred beneath one of the most beautiful skies on earth. Imagine now an Egyptian temple thousands of years ago, after midnight. The desert air has cooled. Torches flicker softly against stone columns carved with hieroglyphics. Far above, stars shine with astonishing clarity. Priests, dressed in white linen, stand quietly atop temple roofs, observing the heavens in silence. Below them, the Nile reflects faint moonlight, while distant jackals cry softly across the desert darkness. The civilization sleeps, but the stars continue moving slowly overhead, exactly as they have for millions of years. And somewhere within that silence, ancient Egypt found a profound sense of order and meaning in the cosmos itself. The Egyptians believed humanity was part of something much larger than individual life. A cosmic rhythm connecting earth, sky, river, gods, kings, and stars together into one eternal system. This perspective gave Egyptian civilization remarkable stability. The universe felt understandable, ordered, balanced. Even chaos itself had a place within the greater harmony of existence. And perhaps this is one reason ancient Egypt still fascinates modern people so deeply. In today's fast-moving world, many people feel disconnected from nature, from cycles, from the night sky itself. But ancient Egypt reminds us of an older relationship between humanity and the cosmos. A quieter relationship, one built on observation, patience, ritual, and wonder beneath the stars. Even now, thousands of years later, the same constellations still rise above the pyramids at night. The same stars ancient priests once studied still shine above the Nile. And somewhere in the darkness above the desert, eternity still feels very close. And now, our long journey through ancient Egypt slowly comes to an end. The desert night grows quieter. The stars remain suspended above the pyramids exactly as they were thousands of years ago. The Nile continues its endless movement northward through the darkness, carrying moonlight across calm waters, beside sleeping cities and forgotten ruins. For hours, we have traveled together through the ancient world. We stood beside the first pyramid builders, hauling stone beneath the desert sun. We walked through temple halls filled with incense and torchlight. We listened to priests studying stars above silent rooftops, while the river flowed below them. We entered hidden tombs deep beneath cliffs, where painted walls still whisper stories about eternity. And through all of it, one feeling remained constant: stillness. Ancient Egypt moved at the rhythm of nature itself. The Nile flooded, crops grew, stars returned each season, dynasties rose and faded. Yet beneath all this change remained a deeper continuity, connecting generations across thousands of years. Perhaps this is why Egypt feels so timeless, even now. Modern life moves quickly. Screens glow constantly. Cities never fully sleep. Information floods endlessly into human minds. But ancient Egypt reminds us of slower rhythms. The rhythm of sunrise over desert stone. The rhythm of water moving through reeds along the Nile. The rhythm of stars crossing the sky above silent temples. Imagine now the final hours before dawn, somewhere in ancient Egypt. Most of the world sleeps. Inside mud-brick homes, oil lamps have burned low. The noise of markets and labor has disappeared. Even the desert wind has become still. Only the Nile continues moving softly through darkness. The pyramids stand silently against the horizon, enormous and unmoving beneath the stars. Nearby, hidden deep within sealed chambers underground, pharaohs rest, surrounded by painted walls and forgotten treasures untouched for thousands of years. The air is cool now, calm, and above everything stretches the immense Egyptian sky filled with endless stars. For the ancient Egyptians, this sky represented eternity itself. The stars outlived kings, they outlived empires. They watched over generations, rising and disappearing beneath them. And in many ways, the Egyptians hoped to become part of that permanence. They built monuments designed to resist time. They preserved names in hieroglyphics carved deeply into stone. They created tombs meant to carry souls safely into eternity. And somehow, against all odds, much of their world survived. Not completely. Time still damaged temples, sand still buried cities, languages faded, dynasties vanished. Yet enough remained. Enough for modern humanity to still feel awe standing beneath the pyramids today. Enough for ancient voices to still speak through surviving texts and monuments. Enough for us to imagine their lives, thousands of years later, beneath the same stars. Ancient Egypt continues to feel alive because its greatest achievements were never merely political or military. Its true achievement was emotional, spiritual, human. The Egyptians confronted the same mysteries humanity still faces today: life, death, memory, time, meaning. And instead of turning away from those mysteries, they built an entire civilization around them. The pyramids were not simply tombs. They were declarations against forgetting. The temples were not simply buildings. They were attempts to connect humanity with eternity itself. Even the smallest hieroglyph, carved into stone, carried hope that something human might survive beyond a single lifetime. And perhaps that hope explains why the civilization still touches us emotionally.
Because modern people are not so different from the ancient Egyptians after all. We still search for meaning. We still fear loss and time. We still look upward into the night sky, wondering about our place within the universe. And so tonight, as our journey through ancient Egypt gently fades into silence, let yourself simply rest for a moment beside the Nile. Imagine the cool desert air. Imagine distant temple columns beneath moonlight.
Imagine soft water moving endlessly through darkness, while stars shine overhead exactly as they did thousands of years ago. The ancient world sleeps now, beneath layers of sand and history. But somewhere beyond the silence, the spirit of Egypt remains. In the river, in the stars, in the monuments standing patiently against time, and perhaps most of all, in humanity's endless desire to leave something beautiful behind before we too disappear into history.